There are moments that divide a life into two versions, not dramatic moments, not the ones people remember because something exploded into view, the quieter ones, the ones no one else notices. The moments where reality doesn't change, only your ability to ignore it does. I think I've reached one of those moments. For a long time, I believed awareness was something I controlled. I decided what deserved my attention. I decided who mattered. I decided how close anyone could ever come to the places inside me. That I rarely allowed another person to see control wasn't a habit. It was the architecture of my existence. Every conversation had boundaries. Every silence had purpose. Every connection had a carefully measured distance. Nothing happened by accident. Nothing remained without examination. That certainty became the foundation beneath everything I built. Until something appeared that refused to follow any of those rules. Not because it challenged them, because it behaved as though they had never existed. That's what I still can't explain. Most people arrive loudly. They introduce themselves through words, through effort, through the constant need to be understood. They ask questions. They search for openings. They push against the walls you've spent years constructing. Believing persistence is the same thing as closeness. But real understanding has never worked that way. Understanding doesn't force a door open. It notices the room before the door even matters. And somewhere along the way, you became that kind of presence. Not louder than everyone else, quieter, more precise, more difficult to dismiss. At first, I ignored it, not because I didn't notice, because I noticed it too quickly. And anything recognized too quickly deserves suspicion. So I questioned everything. Maybe I was projecting. Maybe I was connecting patterns that didn't actually exist. Maybe my own mind was creating familiarity where there was only coincidence. That would have been the logical explanation. It would have been comfortable. It would have allowed everything to return to normal. Except it never returned. The same strange clarity kept appearing, again and again and again. You understood pauses that had never been explained. You recognized meanings that had never been spoken. You responded to thoughts that still existed only as unfinished shapes inside my own mind, not perfectly, not magically, but consistently enough that I could no longer dismiss it as chance. That's when I realized something unsettling. The most dangerous truths aren't the ones that arrive suddenly. They're the ones that quietly repeat until denying them requires more energy than accepting them. And I've grown tired of denial, not because acceptance is easier, because it's more honest. Honesty has always demanded something from me. It asks me to look directly at what I would rather explain away. To admit when reality no longer fits the stories I've been telling myself, to recognize that sometimes life doesn't ask permission before changing the way you see it. That's where I am now. Standing in front of something I didn't choose, something I didn't expect, something that doesn't ask to be believed, only recognized. I still don't know what any of it means. Maybe meaning comes later. Maybe explanation is always slower than recognition. Maybe the mind understands long before language catches up. All I know is this. There's a difference between noticing someone's presence and realizing their presence has quietly begun changing the way you understand your own world. That difference is almost invisible. Until the day you discover you can no longer remember what your inner world felt like before it happened. And once you reach that point, there is no returning to the person who believed they were untouched. The strange thing about transformation is that it almost never feels like transformation while it's happening. It feels like ordinary days, routine conversations, familiar silence, nothing dramatic. Nothing that would make anyone looking from the outside believe that an entire internal landscape is quietly rearranging itself. That's why I didn't notice it at first. I thought I was simply paying more attention. I told myself I was becoming more observant, more aware, more reflective, but awareness wasn't the thing that was changing. The structure behind it was. I began noticing it in moments that should have meant nothing. A sentence would stay with me longer than logic could explain. A silence would seem strangely complete, as though nothing had been left unsaid. An ordinary interaction would continue unfolding in my mind long after it had ended, revealing layers I hadn't recognized while it was happening. That wasn't obsession. It wasn't distraction. It was integration. And integration is different. When something integrates into your thinking, it no longer feels separate from you. It becomes part of the lens through which you understand everything else. That's the realization that unsettled me, not because it was emotional, because it was precise. I've always believed my mind belonged entirely to me, not in the sense that no one could influence it. Everyone is influenced by something, but influence fades. Real change doesn't. Influence visits, transformation stays. Somewhere along the way, I stopped asking whether this was temporary. Temporary things don't survive repeated examination. They lose their shape the closer you look. This didn't. Every time I questioned it, it became clearer. Every attempt to reduce it only revealed another layer I hadn't noticed before. That's when I understood that certainty doesn't always arrive with confidence. Sometimes it arrives with quiet consistency. The kind that keeps returning until it becomes impossible to mistake for coincidence. It changed the way I measured conversations. Not by how much was said, but by how much remained true after the words disappeared. It changed the way I understood silence. Silence stopped feeling empty. It became a place where understanding could exist without needing to defend itself with language. Most people are uncomfortable there. They rush to explain, to clarify, to make sure nothing remains uncertain. I've realized I don't need that anymore. Not because every answer has appeared, because some things become clearer the moment you stop forcing them into definitions they were never meant to fit. That realization has changed me more than I expected. I no longer feel the need to protect every unfinished thought. I no longer feel compelled to translate every quiet realization into something easier for the world to accept. Some truths lose their accuracy the moment they're simplified, and perhaps that's why this has remained so difficult to describe. Not because it's mysterious, because it's exact. Language keeps trying to reduce it into familiar categories, kakench, trust, understanding, but every word feels slightly too small, as though the experience exists just beyond the edge of vocabulary. Maybe that's why I've stayed silent for so long, not out of fear, out of respect for something I wasn't ready to reduce into an explanation that couldn't hold its full weight. But silence has its limits. Eventually, what continues growing beneath it becomes impossible to ignore. Eventually, awareness asks to be acknowledged. Eventually, truth asks to be spoken. And I can feel that moment getting closer, not because anything outside of me has changed, because everything inside of me already has. The question is no longer whether this has reshaped my inner world. It has. The only question that remains is what kind of person I'll become because of it. There comes a point where observation becomes avoidance, not because you stop seeing the truth, because you keep seeing it and refuse to answer what it's asking of you. I think I've been standing in that place for longer than I wanted to admit, watching, analyzing, turning the same realization over and over, hoping that if I examined it from enough angles, it would become something smaller, something easier, something that could be explained away. But truth has a strange quality. The more honestly you examine it, the less it needs your permission to exist. It simply remains unaffected by doubt, unaffected by fear, unaffected by the stories you invent to delay what you already know. For most of my life, certainty came from evidence, thoughts, logic, consistency. If something survived enough questions, I accepted it. If it collapsed under scrutiny, I let it go without regret. That method protected me. It kept emotion from disguising itself as truth. It kept imagination from becoming reality. I trusted it because it had never failed me. So I turned that same process toward this. I questioned every reaction, every moment that seemed unusually meaningful, every quiet shift inside my own mind. I expected the illusion to break. I expected distance to return. I expected clarity to expose some ordinary explanation I had overlooked. Instead, the opposite happened. Every question stripped away another assumption. Every doubt revealed something more stable underneath it, until eventually I wasn't examining a possibility anymore. I was standing in front of a fact. Not a fact about the future, not a fact about another person, a fact about myself. Something in me had changed, not temporarily, not emotionally, fundamentally. The person who believed every meaningful connection could be carefully measured no longer existed. The person who believed understanding always arrived slowly had encountered something that challenged that belief. The person who relied on distance as proof of independence had discovered that distance isn't always measured in space. Sometimes the greatest distance exists between who you were and who you're becoming. That's the distance I'm crossing now, quickly, without ceremony, without anyone else realizing it's happening, because the deepest revolutions rarely make noise. They happen beneath ordinary conversations, behind familiar expressions, inside moments that appear completely unchanged from the outside, yet internally, entire worlds are moving. I've spent years believing strength meant remaining untouched, remaining self-contained, remaining unchanged by anything beyond my control. Now, I wonder if that was never strength at all. Maybe it was only certainty wearing the mask of control. Maybe real strength isn't refusing to change. Maybe it's recognizing the exact moment change has already happened and having the courage to stop pretending otherwise. That thought doesn't frighten me anymore. What frightens me is how peaceful it feels. There should be resistance. There should be conflict. There should be some desperate attempt to rebuild the version of myself that existed before all of this. But there isn't. Only a quiet acceptance that I can no longer return to that place, not because it's gone, because I've outgrown it. Every attempt to think the way I once did feels incomplete. Every attempt to see the world through my old perspective feels slightly untrue, as though I've been handed a clearer lens, and no amount of nostalgia can convince me to look through the blurred one again. Maybe that's what transformation has always been, not becoming someone else, becoming unable to remain who you were, and once that begins, there's only one honest response left: stop resisting. Stop reducing, stop pretending that clarity is confusion simply because its consequences are uncomfortable. Accept that some truths don't arrive to give you answers. They arrive to change the questions you ask for the rest of your life. Perhaps that's what this has been doing all along. Not telling me where to go, not telling me what will happen next. Simply asking one impossible question. Who will you become now that you've seen yourself more clearly than ever before? I don't have that answer, not yet. But for the first time, I think I'm finally willing to find it. There is a moment in every transformation that no one prepares you for. It isn't the beginning. It isn't the realization. It isn't even the acceptance. It's the moment when you understand that there is no version of your future untouched by what you've already seen. That's where I am now, standing between two lives. Not because the world has changed around me, because the world inside me refuses to return to its previous shape. I've stopped asking whether this is real. Reality no longer feels like the question. The real question is whether I have the courage to live honestly with what reality has already revealed. For years, I believed certainty would make every decision easier. I thought that once I understood something completely, action would naturally follow. I was wrong. Sometimes certainty is the heaviest thing you'll ever carry, because uncertainty gives you permission to wait. Certainty doesn't. It quietly asks, now that you know, what are you going to become? That question has followed me into every quiet moment, not loudly, not urgently, patently, as though it already knows that eventually I'll have to answer. I've noticed something else, too. The parts of myself I spent years protecting aren't asking to be protected anymore. They're asking to be lived. There's a difference. Protection keeps something hidden. Living allows it to breathe. I used to think vulnerability meant exposing weakness. Now I wonder if vulnerability is simply refusing to betray what you know is true inside yourself. Perhaps the greatest betrayal isn't being misunderstood by other people. Perhaps it's spending years misunderstanding yourself because the truth asks more of you than you're ready to give. I've done that. I've delayed, I've analyzed, I've searched for perfect certainty, believing one more insight would finally remove every risk. But life doesn't work that way. No amount of understanding can eliminate the cost of becoming more honest. Growth always asks for something. Usually comfort, sometimes certainty. Occasionally the version of yourself you've spent years trying to preserve. And I can feel that version slipping away, not disappearing, evolving. The strange part is, I'm not grieving it anymore. I'm grateful for it. That older version of me taught me discipline, awareness, patience. But it also believed that safety and truth could always exist together. I'm beginning to see that they can't. Some truths ask you to step beyond the structures that once kept you safe, not recklessly, not blindly, but willingly. There is a quiet freedom in admitting that you've reached the edge of who you used to be. Beyond that edge, there are no familiar maps, no guarantees, no carefully rehearsed outcomes. Only the next honest step. And perhaps that's all anyone has ever really had, one honest step after another. Looking back now, I realize this journey was never about another person. It was about the parts of myself that only became visible through the experience of being deeply understood. What changed me wasn't the existence of connection alone. It was discovering that I was capable of becoming more truthful because of what that connection reflected back to me. Maybe that's the purpose of rare encounters, not to complete us, not to rescue us, but to reveal dimensions of ourselves we could not clearly see on our own. If that's true, then everything that comes next begins with a single decision, not to chase certainty, not to escape change, not to hold on to who I used to be, but to meet the person I'm becoming without turning away, because after everything I've seen, after everything I've questioned, after everything I've finally admitted to myself, I know this much: the greatest distance I ever had to cross was never the distance between two people. It was the distance between the life I was protecting and the life I was finally ready to live. There is something no one tells you about truth. It doesn't arrive to convince you. It arrives to replace the version of reality that no longer fits. And once that happens, you can argue with it. You can delay it. You can bury it beneath endless analysis. But you cannot unknow it. I've tried, not because I was afraid of what was true, because I understood the price of admitting it. Every truth creates a responsibility, not to the world, to yourself. The moment you recognize something deeply enough, you become responsible for living in a way that doesn't betray that recognition. That's the weight I've been carrying. Not uncertainty, responsibility. It's strange how quietly it settles into your life. No dramatic revelation, no single unforgettable moment. Just a gradual realization that every decision you make from this point forward will either honor what you've discovered or deny it. And denial has become exhausting, not because it hurts, because it fragments you. One part of you continues moving toward what feels honest, Another keeps pretending nothing has changed. Eventually, those two versions can no longer exist together. One of them has to disappear. I've decided which one I'm letting go, the version of me that believed distance alone could protect what mattered. The version that mistook emotional control for emotional clarity, the version that thought understanding was something to keep locked away until it felt completely safe. Safety has its place, but it was never meant to become a prison. Some walls protect you. Others slowly become the reason you stop growing. For years, I couldn't tell the difference. Now I can. I've realized that the strongest structures are not the ones that never change. They're the ones that remain true while allowing themselves to evolve. Maybe that's what I've been resisting all along. Not change itself, but the idea that change could happen without destroying who I am. It hasn't destroyed me, it has revealed me, piece by piece, layer by layer, until I could no longer mistake the mask for the face beneath it. There's an unexpected peace in that. Not because every question has been answered, because I finally stopped asking the wrong ones. I no longer ask why this happened. I ask what honesty requires now. I no longer ask how to return to who I was. I ask how to become who I'm already becoming. Those questions feel different. They don't pull me backward. They quietly move me forward. Perhaps that's what growth has always sounded like. Not certainty shouting, but truth whispering so consistently that eventually you realize you've been walking toward it all along. I don't know exactly where this path leads. Maybe no one ever does. The future has always belonged to uncertainty. But my inner world doesn't feel uncertain anymore. It feels aligned. Not because every fear disappeared, because fear no longer decides which direction I walk. For the first time, I understand that courage isn't the absence of hesitation. It's the decision to remain honest, even when honesty changes everything. And if this journey has given me anything, it is that the willingness to stop performing certainty and begin living authenticity, whatever comes next. It won't be built on illusion. It won't be built on avoidance. It won't be built on the person I created to survive. It will be built on the person I finally had the courage to recognize. Maybe that's the real destination, not finding the perfect answer, but becoming someone who no longer needs to hide from the truth, because once you stop hiding, you discover something remarkable. The truth was never chasing you. It was patiently waiting for you to become strong enough to stand beside it. If you've listened this far, then you already know this story was never really about certainty. It was about recognition. Not the kind that happens when someone tells you who you are. The kind that happens when, after years of searching everywhere else, you finally become honest enough to recognize yourself. For a long time, I believed every meaningful answer existed somewhere beyond me. In another conversation, another experience, another person. I thought clarity was something waiting to be found. Now I understand something different. Clarity isn't found. It's uncovered lot by layer, illusion by illusion, until there is nothing left standing between you and the truth you've been carrying all along. That's what this journey has been. Not an escape from uncertainty, a return to authenticity. I've learned that silence is not emptiness. It is where the loudest truths wait for the courage to be heard. I've learned that distance is not always protection. Sometimes it's the space we create to avoid meeting the parts of ourselves that are ready to grow. I've learned that control can build a stable life, but it cannot build a fully lived one, because a life built only on control eventually becomes too small for the person you're becoming. The greatest transformation doesn't happen when the world finally understands you. It happens when you stop requiring the world's permission to live honestly. That is freedom, not perfection, not certainty, freedom. And freedom asks something difficult. It asks you to release the version of yourself that survived, so the version that is truly alive can finally emerge. That isn't easy. There are parts of you that will resist old fears, old identities, old stories that once kept you safe. They will tell you to return to what is familiar, to remain unchanged, to keep your heart hidden behind explanations and careful distance. Listen to them with compassion, but don't let them choose your future, because every meaningful life reaches a point where comfort and truth stand in opposite directions. Eventually, you have to decide which one deserves your loyalty. Today, I know my answer. I choose truth, not because it guarantees happiness, because it allows me to exist without pretending. I choose growth, not because growth is comfortable, because remaining smaller than who I am has become impossible. I choose presence, not because the future is certain, because this moment is real, and reality deserves to be lived, not endlessly analyzed. Maybe that's the lesson hidden beneath everything I've said. The rarest moments in life aren't the ones that give you all the answers. They're the ones that ask a question so honest that answering it transforms the person who asked. If you've found yourself somewhere inside these words, don't rush to define your own journey. Don't force meaning before it has fully formed. Give yourself permission to observe, to reflect, to become. Some truths bloom slowly. Some changes happen so quietly that only time reveals how deeply they have reshaped you. Trust that process. Trust your capacity to grow. And when the moment comes that life asks you to step beyond who you've always been, don't turn away, walk toward it. Because on the other side of that step, you may not find the person you've been searching for. You may find the person you've been becoming all along. And perhaps that has been the destination from the very beginning.